Hello, and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo, hosted by Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson.
Hello and welcome to our regular monthly podcast looking at the performance of trade values with Brego. We're joined by Rupert Pontin, Head of Insight and Communication at Brego, who will take us through the key trends impacting used car trade values over the course of June, as well as some of the standout trends from the first half of the year. Brego provides retail-driven trade-valued pricing insight from the widest available market data set in the UK. And to achieve this, it collects up to 1 million retail prices daily and uses a historical database with over 2.2 billion data points. So welcome back to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Rupert. We're recording this on the last day of the month and at the end of Q2. So no doubt a busy time for you as you crunch the final numbers and make sense of it all, really.
Yeah, hi Curtis. It's good to be back. This is always a particularly busy time. So the data we've got runs up until yesterday. So there's sort of 2 days worth of data still to come in. But we've got a pretty clear picture of what's been happening in the market.
Yeah, and as you say, kind of this half-year key point for the year and setting the scene for what to expect for the remainder of the year. So yeah, busy. And at the same time, you're down at the Motor Trader Awards this evening, I think, to get involved with that and up for a couple of awards, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a part of the judging team overall, but Brego entered a couple of awards in product innovation and in product investment. I can't remember the exact name. So we're looking forward to keeping our fingers crossed this evening and hopefully walking away with at least one award. So yeah, it's a busy day.
Also, you've got them fans on ready for you when you get there. They get the aircon, whichever.
So. I sincerely hope they have. Yeah.
Oh, you got usually shorts and dicky bowling.
Yeah, shorts and a dicky bowl. That would be.
Yeah. Look, that's an image that you don't want to get away from it. It's I mean, great to have you back on. And as Curtis said in his intro there, key point time of the year now, end of the second quarter, end of sort of H1. So, I mean, to get things underway, can you give us some of the headline figures for trade values that you're seeing in June and how they've compared to sort of last month and the same point last year?
Yeah, sure. Well, trade values for June actually have been pretty steady overall. In fact, we saw just a very slight change overall from an increase in trade value of just 0.7% when you compare that against May. So that was quite a steady overall month, to be honest, where I think there was some expectation that there would be some significant drops. If I look at it in a little bit more detail, some of the key moves, and I'm looking at trade values here by age, okay? So the whole market, as I said, moved upwards by 0.7%. The biggest mover actually was an increase in trade value for cars 10 years and older. And there was actually a 7.1% increase, and that saw the average trade price in June for a 10-year-old car jump to £3,951. So interesting that it was plus 10-year-old cars, I think, Phil.
Yeah, so that's where it seems to where the focus is with those older vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah. On the converse side, actually, that was vehicles 10 years and older, but actually for 9 and 10-year-old vehicles, there was a drop in the average trade price. And at 9 years old, there was a drop of almost 6%. And for a 10-year-old vehicle, there was a drop of 1.3%. So it's funny, we had seen quite a bit of strength in this sort of 8 to 10-year-old market previously, and that seems to have faded a little bit.
There's some interesting trends going on at the moment in vehicle age, isn't there? Especially that older segment, and that's feeding through into quite a bit of data that's coming through to the market. Now, Rupert, we'll look at specific fuel trends in a moment, but before that, can you take us through some of the trade value trends you tracked by market sector?
Yeah, sure. So market sector was interesting actually. So I'm just looking here at the top 15 sectors. So running from the largest sector, which is the SUV medium, down to upper medium. But generally speaking, trade price there, and looking at the top 15 sectors, increased by 1.1% overall. Okay, so the June trade price average was £14,341, and there were some key movements in there. Really, the biggest move that I saw was a decline for the upper medium car sector. Now, that is the 15th market sector, and we saw a price drop there of 4.8%, which I found quite interesting. There was a little nibble downwards for the SUV small, the SUV large, and I'm talking sort of 1.5%. But that was the biggest downward movement. When we're looking at increases, though, it was interesting to see that the prestige estate medium increased by 3.7%. Average trade price increased by 3.7%. Now, I've noticed over the past few months that market sector has actually been quite volatile, which was a little bit of a surprise for me. So the June trade price, average price, is £18,388. And this obviously refers to the sort of Audi A4 Mercedes C-Class type estate vehicle. And I think that's possibly quite affected by fleet activity.
I was going to say, what do you think it is? Do you think it is that fleet volume coming into the market then?
Well, I think it is. I think it's ebbing and flowing, and we're seeing those vehicles coming back as people are trading themselves, moving themselves out of the traditional sort of the premium estate into EVs and hybrids, and I think that's what makes it so volatile. The other one that's quite volatile is the Prestige Coupe Medium, but that tends to be quite active as well, but a much lower volume. That's the 14th largest market sector, and the movement actually for June over May was an increase of 4.5%, but we're looking at a trade price significantly higher at £36,449.
And as you say, it's smaller volume, so you do see that volatility a little bit more when you get those price movements.
Yeah, I mean, that sector saw sales volume in June of 5,621 cars, and that was actually down 1.2% on the May figure. So, it does really ebb and flow, that one. But and I think to a degree, the time of year can affect it too.
And I mean, you mentioned fuel types a couple of times there, and we can't have you on without especially talking about EVs. But we're at this half year point now. With Q1, Q2, Z mandate still sits there in the background. Where are we now in terms of what you're seeing by fuel type? What's happening with petrol, diesel? What's happening with sort of plug-in hybrid, and especially EVs with the Middle East conflict still going on?
Yeah, no, so it's an interesting period, particularly around the ZEV mandate and what's going to happen with that, whether we have, a change in the leadership of the government and what they decide to do. Actually, for the month, in terms of trade values, it's been pretty stable. The most of the fuel types, and by that I mean petrol, diesel, hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles, they all slightly increase, but we're talking about no more than 0.4%. But the big change was the price on EVs. So the actual price in terms of sales was an increase of 4%, and that went up to 20,189. It was an uplift of £774. In fact, the exact figure I think was 3.8%. But EVs where there's quite a lot of a change in activity, and I was quite interested, not only to see that the trade values had increased, but we also have a long-term view at Brego that if we're looking in 3 years' time, there will actually have been an uplift in the average price residual value for EVs. So we're seeing an upturn. We're forecasting an upturn for those. But if we look particularly at EVs, we saw a decrease in the volume of adverts in the marketplace from May to June. So there was a slight drop at 1.1%. The average advert price actually went up by 3.7%. So that's very similar to the actual sale price that I mentioned at 4%. But it was sales that was surprising me. And now, what do you think has happened in terms of sales volume in June in relation to May?
In terms of
In terms of EVs,
Probably gone up.
no, it hasn't.
Is it not?
No, we've seen a decline of 7.3%. So actual sales volume has trickled backwards. Now, the thinking behind this is that we have seen over the last couple of months this sort of golden period where, because of the war with Iran and the restrictions on fuel, many people decided that they would buy an EV to cut their costs. And I think all of a sudden we're seeing a tail off on that. Now, that's not to say that when you look over that a trended period that the EV sales are falling off a cliff and, they're not increasing. They are, but just month on month, this month, June, we saw a decline of 7.3%.
So you think that's just a slight softening from after that immediate reaction to the fuel prices at the pumps and the Middle East conflict?
Yeah, I do. I think that, it's been mooted anecdotally by the press a couple of times. But for us looking at the data, or for me looking at the data for June, yeah, definitely seeing that. Sales volumes down for the month from 27,350 vehicles in May to 25,354 in June.
And just finally on that bit then, do you think, because obviously we've seen a firming up of EV values and EV demand as the retailers get a little bit more confident in stocking EVs and that price spent on EVs. You think that will sort of stabilize, that we've had that increase now? It may soften, as you've just indicated there, but it'll stay at that new level. We find a bit of a new level for EVs in the marketplace.
Yes, Philip, I do. I totally agree with you. I think that when you look at the upward trend for the year, that's still there, but it's just month on month we've seen this tail off. I think that what will happen is that the confidence will grow in the product. But what is important here is to understand what is likely to happen with the ZEV mandate, and how the potential changes in that, in terms of the volume of vehicles that need to be registered as a total percentage of all registrations. If the requirement for that drops, you may see a little bit of a switch off, but it'll be really interesting to see how that pans out over the course of H2.
And Rupert, just to add to what you were saying there about this peak in EVs, because it's something we covered on the podcast last weekend. There was an industry report that identified a peak in interest in certainly used EVs.
Yes.
Towards the end of February, as Trump's shenanigans in the Middle East started to play out, there was a lot of interest in used EVs. And there was a movement towards more sales in end of Feb through March and through April. So that would suggest that that's supporting your data that shows maybe they've reached a peak for the moment, as prompted by global events.
We see over the course of the year so far that there's been a significant upturn in the percentage of sales EVs that are EVs.
Yeah. And Rupert, as I said during the introduction, because it's end of the quarter, it's the end of the first half of the year. Before we go to the break, what trends have stood out for you so far during the first half of this year in terms of trade values and the data that you're monitoring?
Yeah, I think for me, just different. I'll start just with the advert volumes. So the advert volumes at the beginning of the year were what we would consider to be fairly high, at about 561,000 average adverts in market. Now, that's once you've taken out sort of some of the outliers. Now, what we've seen over the H1 is that volume of adverts in market has continued to increase quite significantly. So there's a trend of an increase in the volume of adverts. Now, that can either indicate more vehicles in market, but it also indicates a softening in sales. Now, from our perspective, we have seen a peak in used car sales around the March time, late February, March time, and I think that was influenced by EVs. But we've also seen the sales have tailed off, and I think it's fair to say that if you talk to the dealers and the guys in the trade during June, they would concur that it's become more and more difficult in H1 to generate leads and to actually close sales. But in terms of pricing, it's been fairly stable, generally speaking, slight nuance upwards as we've gone through H1. Yeah, those are the interesting trends that I've seen in market. If we're not talking specifics about EVs and Chinese vehicles, which I think we'll come on to a little bit later.
But we'll be back after the short break with more from Rupert and Brego.
You're listening to a Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.
So welcome back. Rupert, you track the Chinese OEMs very closely. What trends stood out for you in June amongst some of the newer brands entering the used car market?
Sure. Well, at the start, overall, looking at used car listings, so the volume of used Chinese cars on sale increased again slightly. If we look at the May data, the Chinese brands had a 3.4% share of all used car adverts. That's increased slightly to 3.6%, and I'll come back to that because I think we're going to see that increase quite a bit as we go across the course of this year, particularly, and that's in part due to the fact that some of the Chinese brands are doing some rental activity, and of course more registrations. There's more churn, so that's what's happened in terms of the adverts. When you look at the number of Chinese car sales, which we monitor month on month, as a percent of the whole market sales, in March they took 3.3%. In April they took 3.4%. May they dipped slightly to 3.2%, but they're back up to 3.5% of total used car sales for June 2026. So there's this trending upwards, and I find it fascinating that it's very close to the volume of adverts as well, which really shows me that the volume of adverts is increasing, but so is the demand. So we're not seeing a drop in corresponding in the relationship there between adverts and sales.
And just before we talk about sort of retail advert volumes that you touched on earlier in terms of that look back at the first half of the year, what you're hearing and seeing around tactical activity. I know before we started to record, sort of mentioned that you're hearing a little bit of noise around pre-reg tactical activity, where you want to name it. I mean, as we said, H1 is a crucial time of the market for the manufacturers and dealers alike to set that first half of trading for the year. Are you hearing anything? What's the feedback or activity that you're seeing around tactical pre-reg activity at the minute?
Well, for sure. I mean, I'll cover off just before I go into the pre-reg part of it. Just track back a second to the number of Chinese used cars in market, and this is relevant to the pre-reg, I think. There's been, if you look at those brands that have got a significant market share, there's been quite a jump in the number of used cars in market, particularly between May and June, particularly for Polestar, which saw an increase of 11.6% of used car adverts. Moda, a 20% increase, JQ, a 51% increase. So we're really starting to see those vehicles start to come back into the used car marketplace. And when we talk, moving to specifically what you said, Philip, about pre-registration, I was looking at the data literally as we started to record, so it probably requires a little bit more delving into. But what I have seen that backs up some of the feedback we've had from the dealers is that when you look at battery electric vehicles, the pre-reg volume has, and I quantify pre-reg as anything that's under 1 year old and under 100 miles. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Battery electric vehicles increased by 28.5% in June, which is quite a jump. It's higher than plug-in hybrids at 27.5%. So that supports what we're being told by the dealers that we work with, that the guys are really, really pushing on getting those new cars out into the marketplace.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a little bit of that out with as we move through this sort of second half of the year. I mean, just briefly, just turning back to the retail advert volumes, and you touched on it a little bit in terms of some of the activity that you see through the the first half of the year. Just focusing on June, what we're seeing in June. I mean, you mentioned earlier about that, the easing of the EVs, but what are you seeing generally around retail advert volumes through your data set?
Well, looking at a high level, June increased, the total volume of adverts in June increased to 1.3%. And the advert volume, I think, was on average 833,000 a day that we saw. The interesting thing is when we look at the advert listings by age of vehicle. So looking at that sub 1 year old, I just talked about a figure of 28.5% that I ran first thing just before we came on air. The data I've got that I ran yesterday afternoon was an increase of 32.4%. So that shows you that there is some volatility in the volume of adverts day by day. Now we're coming to the end of the month, right? And it is the end of H1, so we could well see a bit of a jump further jump in advert listings in the final days. But the other thing that struck me was that we have this patch around 4-year, 5-year-old vehicles, which I did touch on earlier. And we've seen actually that there's been a decrease in the volume of adverts. Now, that's probably pretty much the only place we've seen a decrease in the number of adverts. This month, it's been particularly for 4-year-old vehicles, and there's been a drop of 3.3%, which I find fascinating. There seems to be a pocket of demand there for 4- and 5-year-old vehicles, which has sort of drawn the total volume of adverts in market down a little bit.
And finally, Rupert, your analysis also covers the month's best sellers. So who were
Yes.
the big winners in June?
Well, big fastest sellers for June, if you look at the whole market, it was the MGHS plug-in hybrid trophy, and that took just 5.9 days to sell. And I've been very specific about derivatives. So there were 86 sales that were recorded in as an average 5.93 days to sell, which I think is pretty cracking. That was followed by Skoda with their Karoq, which was 10.6 days to sell, 85 sales. And then again, MG in that top three with the MG4, the SE with 13.27 days to sell. So as an overall market, very, very active. Now, without wishing to bore you, I could go through sort of by age, sort of 1, 3, 5, and 10-year-old vehicles. But I think the two other areas of particular interest to those that are listening would be to hear the fastest sellers for electric vehicles. And for June, the fastest seller was the Audi Q4 each-one S-Line, which sold in 8.67 days. And that was followed strangely, I say strangely because they've not appeared in our top 10 list for a while, the Nissan Ariya at 12.5 days to sell, and then followed there by the MG4. And if you look at Chinese cars for June, what do you think was the fastest selling car in June?
Probably something with a BYD on the bonnet.
Well, it isn't actually. So quite often you expect
You're both on one of these questions, aren't we, Curtis?
Come on, guys, you've got to catch up.
It's a good job this is only a rehearsal.
You need to be using the Brego data. That's what you need. Yeah. So actually, I was a little bit surprised by this because usually it's a Tesla. Chinese car. Sorry. I was surprised on two counts. First, it was a Volvo XC40, the Recharge Plus version, which sold.
That's a trick question, Rupert.
Well, it does depend. You count as a Chinese car, so exactly. Yeah. All right, if we're talking a true Chinese vehicle, then in second place was the Elite Motor B10, and that's 0.4 days to sell. Then the Polestar 2, the long range version, and there's a lot of talk about Polestar at the moment, isn't there? Particularly around the market. Yeah,
it definitely is. Yeah. So just it's fascinating now. I mean, you mentioned MG in there in the top 10 a few times of the overall, and now we're talking about Elite Motors, fairly reasonably new to the UK market, but now becoming one of those faster sellers around that EV. Which is it that they're just offering such a good value price point to the buyers that they're looking to move into that EV sector, and similar with the Polestar 2 long range, it's just at the minute it's capturing that audience.
Well, I think you're absolutely right there, Philip. And I have to say that the Elite Motor is one of the brands that we hear is pushing particularly hard on pre-registration activity. If you look at some of the leasing deals that are available on Elite Motors, and the short churn on Elite Motor products in the market, I think that they are really trying to push sales, and they don't have a great deal of volume either.
Well, I mean, also we could talk about this for forever, and I know, as you said right at the start, I mean, it's a crucial time for you as we sort of close down the quarter, the month, and the half-year point of getting this data through your systems, trying to make sense of it all, as well as go and hopefully collect a couple of awards for you for Brego as well, Rupert. But I mean, I mean, fascinating. To say, you know, those days to sell, what's been happening in terms of that volume in the market, what's been happening by fuel type, and as always, I mean, if the listeners do want to get hold of you, maybe leave it till, you know, a bit late morning on the Wednesday, maybe after the awards, depending how it goes for Brego this evening. How can they get hold of you to talk about some of this data in a little bit more detail and you know, see some of this analysis that you've sort of given us a high level overview this morning?
Well, the easiest way is just to reach out to me. All my contact details are on LinkedIn. So are the contact details for the other guys in the team. The other way is to have a look at the website, which is www.brego.io, and there are contact forms on there. But yeah, anybody who's listening that wants more insight, just give me a call, drop me an email, and I'll hook you up with somebody that can give you the detail you need.
But that's all for now. So many thanks, Rupert, for joining us. We'll catch up again this time next month to see how July performed. Thanks for listening. We hope you found this trade values insight useful. Philip and I are back with all the big car retailing headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.